To make the most of this Winnipeg Jets offseason, it is time for Winnipeg to pull out one of the very secret weapons that teams do not use, the dreaded offer sheet.
Your Locked On Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for choosing to make Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, we are talking about the ever-mysterious and very rarely used offer sheet. This is one of the very secretive tools that isn't really a secret. It's been done recently, and increasingly, we've seen some one-off instances of teams doing it to some players that maybe, are either worth it or perhaps not. Most recently, I think the Blues did a really good job of getting both Dylan Holloway and Philip Broberg out of Edmonton using this process. And let's be real, Broberg and Holloway were fantastic additions to their team. And so looking at this is a very unique tool that can honestly piss off a lot of people, and it's probably why a lot of teams are a little bit loath to do it. You don't often see squads going this route, and for the Jets, this is a very unusual tactic. But when you look at Winnipeg's position out there, where they are in the sea of trade markets, how they're often viewed by outsiders and players, offer sheets might be one of the intriguing ways to try and work around some of the usual trade restrictions. I want to talk about some big RFA targets that the Jets might be after, as well as players that the Jets might be at risk of getting offer sheets for, and whether or not it would actually happen to the Jets rather than for them. Let's start off with the offer sheet process itself and what the Jets can do this coming summer. So the first step is, what the heck is an offer sheet, right? This is a contract offer made to an expiring RFA who meets a certain number of qualifications for professional experience and stuff. And when a contract offer is tendered, a team has to hit a couple of different price brackets, right? It's not something that you can just throw at somebody. And if you're the Jets, this is, again, one where you need to be careful and make sure that you are making the right choice and targeting very specific players. The way it works is you work in a certain salary range, and based on that salary that you offer a player, if the offer is accepted by the player and is not matched by the team that you are offer sheeting, guess what? You get that player and you give up a fairly substantial draft pick compensation package pending what kind of salary range you're talking about. The Jets this year are in most brackets of eligibility for offer sheeting a team. The problem is that Winnipeg's Luke Schenn trade has unfortunately kneecapped them in one of the best price ranges that you could ask for. $7 million to $11.7 million. There are two packages here that the Jets could potentially do, or couldn't, or they would have been able to do had they not traded away their second rounder. 7.02 mil to about 9.36 would have been a first, a second, and a third round pick from this year's draft. And it has to be your own draft pick. It can't be somebody else's. And because the Jets did this Luke Schenn trade, they don't own their second rounder anymore. They could conceivably get it back, but is that really likely? I don't think so. I can't imagine Schenn would be getting you a second in return, let me tell you, and I doubt the Jets are going to try and do this route anyways. Might as well just consider it a lost pick. The other salary range that this impacts is $9.36 million to $11.7 million. That would have been two first rounders and a 2026 second rounder and third rounder. So again, pretty expensive, not a cheap one. If you go above 11.7, you're looking at four first rounders. Pretty hefty, right? Below that, the Jets have good eligibility, right? So the Jets qualify for 4.68 to 7 million, which is a first and a third. And they're also in a couple of lower ranges below 1.5 million and from 1.5 to 2.34 million or so. It's a little bit frustrating, though, because you look at how many different salary ranges that they could go after. And the Jets only have ability to really work in a couple of lower ranges. The first and probably the most likely range that I think the Jets would operate in is 4.68 to 7-ish, right? Which is great. It's awesome that they have the space. It'd be a first and a third. And if you're looking at players out there who could qualify for something like this to receive a good offer sheet, there are some legitimate targets on my trade list that I think would actually make a lot of sense. Chief among them is probably Marco Rossi. We'll focus a little more on the offer sheet targets in a little bit. The problem for me is that the Jets have limited their range by a fair bit. If they wanted to really chase a bigger fish, they can't do that. And because of that, with this summer being really interesting, and with teams quite honestly coveting those 2026 picks a lot more than some of their own assets, this feels like a big missed opportunity. The Jets not having their second rounder for this season is super frustrating. This could have been a really good opportunity to try and do something a little bit different. Realistically, Winnipeg has to be aggressive. This is their summer of Chevy. And if they can't get trades done, offer sheets might legitimately open doors that they weren't considering. Now, should the Jets do this? I think it's only worth it under a couple of key conditions. I would go for players who are out of favor, who have some real upside, guys like Rossi. And if you do this, go in with the knowledge that, look, you may ruffle some feathers, but if it's a player who's out of favor, more than likely the team that holds their rights is probably not that inclined to match. Unless they're trying to really get the most out of a trade that they can, most of these compensation packages are halfway decent. And if the player really isn't soliciting many good offers externally, this is a great route for a team to try and up the offer just a little bit that they might not actually be getting on the open market. And for the Jets, this could be a route that you really pursue if you think that you've got a shot at getting maybe a top 6 or a middle 6 upgrade at a reasonable price in a way that, maybe you target off of one of your rival teams. Maybe you go for a team in the Central that's not willing to give up one of their RFAs in an open trade, but if you force their hand and give a good offer sheet contract that's not one that they want to match, they'll just have to take the draft pick compensation. So I think that this is a really underutilized thing, and I sometimes imagine teams to be a little overly afraid to do this. We've seen Montreal and St. Louis recently do this. There's varying degrees of seriousness about how aggressive teams really are about offer sheets. What's nice about this coming summer is that there are a lot of choices to go with. Offer sheets are always a fun time. They tend to drum up a lot of drama. And for the Jets, I would be intrigued to see who they would go after, because I would say, again, the most effective way to go about this is to target a big name. Don't go for mid-tier players where you're burning assets unnecessarily. Go for heavier names that could really upgrade Winnipeg's top 6 and give this Jets team some real finishing talent. In terms of blue liners, I don't really feel like that part of the market is going to be one where offer sheets are going to be as helpful. I think if that were to be the case, the Jets would honestly just go with an open trade. But for forwards, that's where things start to get really interesting. And I want to identify a couple of targets for me that I hold pretty highish regard, guys that I could see Winnipeg taking a real stab at if things are maybe not progressing on the trade front. We'll chat about some of my favorite targets and who I think the Jets maybe should go after and give a nice offer sheet offer to in just a brief moment. The NBA playoffs are in full swing, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get on the action than right now. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. Now, for those of you who maybe aren't following the NBA like I am, the Stanley Cup Finals are still covered by FanDuel. They've got all of your favorite sports. And if you're looking at the battle of McDavid versus Barkov, maybe you think you know how many points McDavid is going to score. Maybe you suspect you know what sort of plus or minus rating Barkov might finish the playoff series with. If you do, This is your chance to win big. You can go into FanDuel, bet on these player props, and if you want to win even bigger, you can even combine same-game parlays for a massive victory. And if you're new to FanDuel, there's an even better offer because it is the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets to extend those winnings. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are chatting a little bit about free agents of the RFA status, those that I think are perhaps intriguing for the Jets to go after, players who could be, legitimate upgrades to Winnipeg's top or middle six. Offer sheets are always a dicey moment because you have to, map out the right salary range, make sure that you're not overpaying, and you want to avoid pissing off the teams that you're doing this to, and sometimes the retaliatory stuff can be really annoying. I think for the Jets, the kind of guys that they'd be going after and could really make use of offer sheets for are not likely to incur a lot of wrath. I'm looking at players who maybe are a little bit out of favor. Perhaps they are not as highly coveted by their respective teams. Although there is one guy that I might be willing to upset and rock the boat with. This is a guy that I've been hot on for a while. He went to Seattle and has done really well. And so, not all of this is going to be sunshine and roses for their respective teams. But let's start off with maybe the most controversial target, Kaapo Kakko. Kakko just arrived in Seattle pretty recently. I don't know what his personal feelings are on the Kraken. Seattle is going through a bit of a pun intended sea change right now. And so if Kakko doesn't really feel committed to the vision and wants to join a different team, he would be a fantastic addition to Winnipeg. He's got finishing talent. He's a great skater. And if you notice when he was in Seattle, one of the things that he often doesn't get enough respect for is his spatial awareness. The guy just has a keen sense of when to crash the net, when to be around the goal mouth, and he profited quite a few points off of that. Because of all this stuff, and because the Kraken are kind of in a weird spot, I don't know that they're all that interested in, the current core, right? I've heard them, reject the Jets before. We know that they were keen on keeping McCann and Alexiak, which I think is very funny, but that was the old regime. I don't know how this new regime is. Maybe they do feel like this team is more competitive, and there's a good chance that Kakko is kind of seen as a bigger piece, but if you look at where he's used and sort of the roles that he's played with both the Rangers and Kraken, he's been given a much bigger leash in Seattle. That said, he's 24. The Kraken probably aren't going to be competitive all that soon. They're going to need to start tearing some things down, sooner than later because they've got a lot of guys on the wrong side of their late 20s and 30s. And so Kakko kind of sort of fits their timeline, sort of doesn't. And if the Jets were interested in maybe reaching out because I think Lane Lambert is taking over, maybe this is where, a chance for a big offer sheet or trade happens. If you can't get a trade going because the Kraken are just unwilling to, then maybe you should consider offer sheeting. Kakko is a really cool talent. Obviously, he's not going to be that top 3 overall sort of pick that he was, many years ago, but I still think he could be a really good addition to this Jets offense. He's great on the power play. He's a good even strength finisher, and with the likely departure of Ehlers, he would also help with your right wing situation and depth charts. So if you're looking for an intriguing option, Kakko might fit that void. I think the bigger question is, what salary range do you go with? Now, obviously, there's only one that I think really makes the most sense here. You're probably looking somewhere around the $5 million range, maybe $5.5 million. I don't know if Kakko would really accept that, so maybe you'd have to up it to like 6. That's a little pricey, and I think a lot of people would probably balk at it. I think he's one of those guys where if you're swinging for this, it's because you project him to be a much more special talent than he initially appears. And I think his early returns in Seattle, for me, suggest that there is continued untapped potential with him. I felt that way when he was in New York. It's why I really pushed for the Jets to trade for him, and I think it's still true. A first and third is also pretty modest. I will say if the Jets don't do that well next season, that is a big first-round pick. So This is not an easy gamble to make. It's not quite as straightforward as maybe I'm making it sound. There is a real calculation. If you think the Jets are likely to miss the playoffs next year, which I'm not on that train, but maybe you do, you might be looking at this and saying, why would you give up your first rounder? This is a 2026 class that a lot of people are really hyping up as being very deep and very good, and one that you could potentially walk away with a king's ransom if you're smart and if you luck out with how the draft order goes. My problem with that thinking is the Jets kind of need to get better now. Like, their competitive window is right now. Whoever you draft next year, sure, they might be a really good talent, but it might take them several years before they become an impact NHLer. And the Jets by that point are probably looking more at a rebuild sort of timeline than they are competing. And so, does that really benefit you in the immediate present? And for me, you could trade that prospect. Maybe you even trade down. You have options there with that pick. But if you can get a really high quality NHLer right now who's already had a fair bit of experience, who's got a proven track record, and who has already excelled at the NHL level and has tool sets that you frankly just don't have enough of, maybe you should just bite the bullet and try it, right? This is a chance to really swing for the fences and go for somebody special. Now, as much as I really do enjoy Kakko, there is a guy that I also could really see making a lot of sense for the Jets. It's Marco Rossi. And Rossi is one of those players who, look, he's out of favor in Minnesota. Teams don't seem to be willing to even give up a first rounder this season for him. And I don't really know what Bill Guerin's view of trading in division is. If he's willing to entertain a trade to the Jets, for instance, with a premium of some sort on top of what his asking price was, then I would certainly prefer that route. Rossi, I know, everyone's going to say he's 5'9", he's undersized. Listen, he's playing in the hardest, most physical division in hockey. He's already had a 60-point season this past year. He is an absolute pest and menace below the goal line. And when you look at his height and stature and build, he's actually like heavier Marchand. They're built very similarly. In fact, they do share some similarities with how they attack the net front area. Marchand's obviously more of a rat-type player and has a much chippier edge than Rossi does. Rossi, though, is a super skilled, very smooth skater, very smart about when to jump into passing and shooting lanes, and he is a phenomenal playmaker and goal scorer. He's got a great release, and he has a keen sense of timing, which I think not only makes him a great 5v5 threat, but if you look at the footage of him on the power play, Davis Payne would love him, right? I was talking about Ehlers walking and needing a big replacement in that spot. Rossi is a guy who I could easily see being that sort of roaming threat and really a versatile scoring presence on the power play. Now, if the Jets can't get them to make the trade, you could try the offer sheet route. And somebody mentioned that earlier. In thinking about this, it's a little bit tricky for me because, again, I just talked about how that first rounder is worth a fair bit. Even a late first rounder next year could hold some considerable trade value. So if Winnipeg does go this route, look, my guess and my personal feeling is that I don't think you're going to get many players of Rossi's caliber where the Jets will be drafting. You just aren't. And if you give up a third rounder with it, who cares, right? I would feel a lot more comfortable with a very known quantity in Rossi versus a maybe at a good prospect later in the first, because, I don't really envision the Jets falling out of the playoffs completely. That said, I think that there's risk of it. So, that first rounder, it's a big gamble. And if you choose to go this route, you're probably pushing, basically at the upper end of this contract limit. Now, if you're Rossi, I don't really know how you view that. Would you be willing to accept a trade to the Jets and well, not really a trade, but an offer sheet to the Jets? Would you be willing to sign that contract? I doubt the Wild would really feel like they need to match it because a first next year plus a third is probably way better than they would normally get in the open trade market. Even the Flyers were kind of very cool on even giving up this year's first rounder, unless the ask was next year's first rounder, which, if that's the case, that's a little more understandable. I know that they also weren't willing to give up Tyson Forster. So, clearly the market for Rossi is not that great. And so the Jets, they'd be paying a premium already if they go the offer sheet route. My feeling is, try the trade route first, right? But if you can't get Guerin to give it up, then maybe look at forcing his hand. A first rounder and a third rounder next year is a really generous offer if it was a trade, especially for a free agent who, the team does not seem to value for whatever reason. Rossi's a great player. I know people, again, will criticize his undersized, stature and stuff, but he's already performing at an elite level in this division. And the Jets, frankly, don't have many levers to push on when they want to add great scoring talent and skill. They just don't. They've got players in the pipeline who will eventually be very helpful in this respect and who I think can boost this team in the future. But the Jets need to add immediate skill, and Rossi's only 23. That is an extraordinarily rare mixture of talent and production to find for a player who might cost you not much more than a first rounder. So, for Winnipeg, I really feel like this is a strong consideration. Again, I would be a little less preferential to doing the offer sheet route with him, but if the Jets can't make it happen and they need to force a move, this is a good option and one that I think the Jets could absolutely exploit and take advantage of. The last guy that you could also do this to is Mason McTavish. I would probably not love the idea of going this route necessarily. McTavish is a very good player. I just feel like if you're looking for top-end center talent, McTavish could do that job, and a first and a third for him is probably not insane. But if I had to choose, I just feel like I would prefer Rossi, who's already performed really well in this division. He's a great known commodity. I think the Jets are personally pretty high on him, and he's a surprisingly strong skater and a strong player too. His lower body, if you've ever seen his quads, he is ripped. And so for me, McTavish, again, could absolutely do it. I think if I had to choose, though, I'd probably go Rossi. I just think Marco and how this team plays and what they would be looking for from him, he would really, really thrive. He's great in the net front area. He's a real pest and a menace down low. And I think he offers something for Winnipeg that they currently could use more of. That screen option, that very careful tipped option. He doesn't have a ton of stature, but he is a constant workhorse down low. And because he's got such good hand-eye with his stick, he gets a ton of deflections. He's a great player, and I think he would fit in beautifully here. Let me know if you'd trade or offer sheet for Rossi. I know some people commented on the last video that they weren't super in love with that, or maybe it was 2 videos ago. But if the Jets could do an offer sheet and a first and a third for next year, would you do that? Would you feel that's too expensive? Drop your thoughts in comments below or at my social medias at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. I've talked about a couple of offer sheet targets. What about players that are on the Jets that other teams could target for offer sheets? Are the Jets at risk for this? Let's chat about that in a brief moment. Hey friends, and welcome back to these closing thoughts on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we're chatting a little bit about offer sheets, the great drama around them, and could this be a lever that the Jets pull, considering that they don't have many of the traditional tools available to them thanks to some market conditions, no trade clauses, no movement clauses, whatever, right? Everyone's got some excuse, and some of it's real, some of it's maybe not as real as people want it to be, but all the same, I think that there are some really tough realities, and offer sheets can be a very useful tool to call upon if you're a team like Winnipeg that needs to add talent however it can. Amidst all of that, though, the Jets do have their own RFAs, and that opens up a big question. If the Jets can offer sheet a team out there, couldn't they just do that back to us? The answer is yes, and we have 2 big RFAs that are likely to be a little bit of I would say a hot commodity for some teams. I don't anticipate the Jets receiving offer sheets, but if they do, it would be either for Velarde or Sandberg. Sandberg is obviously, for me, the guy that I would say is least likely to accept one. He wants to stay here, and I think that that's very clear. Dylan is a guy that is considered instrumental to this team. He's, a Minnesota boy and very close to home in a lot of ways. Winnipeg loves this kid, and I would have to say I'm one of his biggest fans out there. I know a lot of folks love Slammy. He's really one of the linchpins and cornerstones of this franchise's defense. And the thing with the offer sheet is if you were to try to do this, because he doesn't have a lot of crazy counting stats, you wouldn't really see a big salary offered and thrown at him. The Jets would likely match almost any offer sheet given, unless the AAV was something insane like 9 or 10 million, right? I can't see the AAV that would be offered or tendered being over like 5 mil, but if it does start to push above that, that's where you start having some real challenges because, in my head, I know what Sandberg's value is. He is an elite shutdown two-way defender, and there's not that many of them out there. And if the Jets are going to deal with a Morrissey who's, perhaps aging a little bit and starts to slow down over the next couple of years, Sandberg is going to be eventually your number one guy. And so keeping him is really pivotal to this team's success. We know that this team physically cannot live without him. We saw that they were basically 500 when he got injured earlier this year. It's why he's for me a guy that I'm not too stressed about. I don't really envision that many teams wanting to throw big money at him, again, because he just doesn't have the counting stats. And really, that's what typically drives a lot of defender contracts, which is very funny when you think about a player who's supposed to prevent points against is judged for the points for. And that's just a little bit of a backwards sort of thought process. But, because he doesn't have that huge offensive production on the score sheet, I would imagine him coming in with an offer sheet range, probably in that first and third round pick. And I just don't think the Jets would avoid matching it. I think they would go for it. I think that they would make sure that Sandberg is theirs. And I think Dylan, again, probably wants to stay in Winnipeg and basically be, for the most part, a career Jet. So he's not a guy I'm worried about. Vilardi is a little bit of a different situation. Gabe has kind of been up and down. He's 26 almost. He's got some positional versatility, although he just really plays wing nowadays. And, he's the thing with Vilardi, I really do enjoy him. I think he's a great power play asset. I think he's a super skilled player. Some of the injuries and stuff that he's going through right now, though, have really started to creep in to his game. And I'm starting to wonder what the, future for his career really looks like. It was always going to be a question based on some of the back injuries and stuff that he's had before. I think for me, I don't envision too many teams being interested in taking on this risk. If they were to try and offer sheet him, probably in that 5-ish to $5.5 million range, I would imagine the Jets would match it. If they don't, that gets to be a really interesting question. Would you, if you're the Jets, if you choose not to match it, it's a first and a third, which doesn't feel like a very good return. But it is a first rounder next year. And if he's going to a team that's bad, would that be a first round pick that holds considerably more value to you? I don't know. Again, I can't really see a scenario where the Jets don't match because, he's beloved here. I think Vilardi is a big fan favorite. I think the team really likes him. And again, a first and a third feels pretty light for what I would expect in a trade package for him. But again, because those top picks next year could be fairly influential in a franchise's future, maybe there's more consideration that would have to go into it. It would really depend on which team is inquiring about an offer sheet for him. And, I don't know what his mindset is about extending with the Jets. I'd imagine it's pretty positive. He's a top line player here. He's treated like one. He gets royalty on the power play. I don't really see a reason for him to leave. But again, just something to keep an eye out for. If you're looking at RFAs that I think are on the upper end of this Jets pool that are more likely to walk, he'd be one of them. But again, I wouldn't stress about it. I think the Jets are going to extend both. Sandberg long-term, I think Vilardi gets more of a bridge, and maybe that's where you start to run into some real questions if another team tries to offer sheet him. So the Vilardi future, I feel, is more uncertain than I thought it would be coming into the season. As we start to monitor that situation and see if his name starts popping up in more trade rumors, we'll keep an eye on that and talk about, what that situation would even look like. The Jets have a very weird summer coming up, and maybe one that's going to be a little bit tough to predict. I'm hoping that the Jets come out on the right side of all this, but it's a tricky situation. The league is always changing. The Jets need to really take advantage of their competitive window right now. And if teams start trying this offer sheet route, especially with a cap that is going up next season and beyond, this could be a very explosive offseason. So stay tuned to hear about more throughout the summer. We'll chat about all of this and keep an eye on which teams might be, more open to offer sheets, who the Jets might be after, and if we can finally see a big upgrade to this core But for tonight's episode, that is all the time that we have. I thank you so much for listening and making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. We'll see you back here next week, so have a great night, enjoy your weekend, and as always, go Jets go.